Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. It's a nice day outside, so you're giving up some quality time in the sun. The Sea Ranch Forum Steering Committee is an independent group. We are not an official committee or function of TSRA. Our goal is to present forums that are relevant to life on the Sea Ranch. In many cases, our interests run parallel with the communication interests of TSRA, and we do cooperate with various departments in presenting forums. However, our greatest value to the Sea Ranch is in presenting information outside the formalities of the Sea Ranch Association. And now I'd like to talk about next month's forum before we start. The Sea Ranch Board of Directors Candidates Forum has long been a tradition at the Sea Ranch. It's been held the first or second Saturday in April for many years. This year's Candidates Forum will be held on Saturday, April 7th. In the past, as a part of the day's events, the association has hosted a reception in the DMC house following the forum. This year, the Forum Steering Committee has decided that it is more appropriate to maintain our total independence from the association. Therefore, we and the association have jointly agreed that henceforth this event should be sponsored solely by the Forum Committee. This leaves a problem. The Forum Committee has no funds. No speakers are ever reimbursed for their presentations. Sorry guys, I don't know if you've been led to think otherwise. Nevertheless, we feel that a reception has great value in offering the members of the community the chance to get to know the candidates in a more informal setting. Therefore, we are inviting everyone to attend a no-host reception in the DMC house after the forum next month. Will you please bring a plate of finger food to share and whatever beverage you would like to drink. The committee members will provide napkins, plates, and cups, and a bottle opener. Maybe two. We will look forward to making this a really festive event to celebrate living in such a wonderful community and to especially to celebrate the members of our community that are willing to give their time and effort to taking care of us and looking after our collective interests. So we hope everybody will be able to go with this change of format, and we look forward to seeing everybody next month. Now, Mary Dee's not here, but I still have to ask, are there any other announcements? Okay, we're very happy today to have all of the people here with us that keep us safe. One of the most wonderful benefits of living in this community is that we feel very safe. And I think we should start out by giving a round of applause to all the people that keep us safe. And I'm going to turn this microphone over to our Director of Security, Lynn Placia. We will have a normal format. We will have presentations that will run about 45 or 50 minutes. We will have a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we will have questions from the floor. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department for taking the time to do this today, and I'd like to turn it over to Sheriff Cogbill so he can introduce his staff.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having us. I've done this now a few years. Just wondering, I think we did it 2 years ago, was it? 3 years ago? I don't know. Was anybody here when we did it last time? Just want to check, because if I say something I said last time, or I can keep saying the same thing if you've never been here before, and I can make things up. But I want to introduce the staff that I have here with me. To my left is Assistant Sheriff Richard Sweeting, in charge of the Law Enforcement Division for the Sheriff's Office. Captain Matt McCaffrey, in charge of the Patrol Division for the Sheriff's Office. In the back we have Sergeant Dave Anderson, in charge of the Guerneville Substation and the River area. And then Rich Zanino, who you see all the time. I'd also like to, that's it. I'd also like to introduce Sheriff Tom Allman from Mendocino County. He's here also. Just in case you have complaints about anything that happens over the other side of the river. He can answer those questions for you. Well, what I like to do is just talk about, in general, what things are going on as far as law enforcement is concerned, more specifically the Sea Ranch and the coast area, And then, as stated, I'd like to open it up to questions, depending on how far we get with this. And I will ask any questions you'd like about anything that's going on, anything you may have read in the paper. It doesn't have to be about Sea Ranch. If you have an interest or concern about law enforcement in general, the criminal justice system, services that you're getting or not getting, or just because you heard or read something that you're not sure about and would like to ask us, since we're here, this is the opportunity for you to ask us any of those questions you want. It doesn't have to be on just the Sea Ranch or concerns that you have here, although we would like to hear those also. As you know, the Sheriff's Department is responsible for all the unincorporated areas in Sonoma County. There's about 1,600 square miles in Sonoma County, and 1,500 of those are unincorporated. And so we're stretched pretty thin through those areas, and one of our main priorities is delivering as quickly as services as we can to the areas that we service. In addition to the unincorporated area, we also have responsibility for the contract cities of Windsor and Sonoma. We police those areas, those cities under contract, and our deputy sheriffs are the ones that patrol those. In addition to that, we're responsible, as far as law enforcement is concerned, we're responsible for the coroner's office, so that all our deputy sheriffs are deputy coroners, and we have detectives assigned to the coroner's unit for that. My actual title is sheriff coroner. Doesn't mean I'm the coroner. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm a pathologist. We hire pathologists to do our forensic pathology in the coroner's office, and then we have detectives assigned there to assist in death investigations. So that's another one of our responsibilities. Another one is court security. If you ever go to court in Santa Rosa, you'll see our deputy sheriffs in the courts and patrolling that areas and transporting prisoners back and forth. The last major function that we have is the jail, and we're responsible for running in the jail. Currently, in our jail in Santa Rosa, we have one in Santa Rosa and we have one at the airport, Sonoma County Airport, and there's about 1,200 inmates in our jail. And what's changed recently about our jail population, and I know it doesn't affect you too much here because your crime rate is so low here, but still, just it's interesting for you to know what's going on in the rest of Sonoma County and how our services are reflective of what the needs are in the entire county as in respect to the different areas. Like I said, there's 1,200 inmates that are currently in our jail. 200 of those are in there because of mental health problems. The Sonoma County Jail, along with the other county jails in California, are the largest mental health institution in California today. Because these people aren't getting the treatment they should get, and there's not enough treatment beds available, we end up seeing those people because of the crimes they committed in our jail. And then we have the responsibility until they're brought to a situation where they can stand trial for their competency. We are responsible for them. And as a result of that, it takes up a lot of our staff time to deal with these people because we have to have a psychologist, we have to have psychiatric nurses, we have to have medication, we have to have all those things that a psychiatric hospital would have to keep these people medicated or at least give them the services they need to bring them to competency so they can stand trial. Otherwise, they're going to sit with us for some time. We get those people transferred eventually to state hospitals where they can be treated even better than they can at ours because we're not a hospital. Yet recently we were told we couldn't send any more to the state hospitals because they were all full. And so our population is growing as we sit there trying to get these people off to get them to be competent, and they languish in our jails and take up a lot of our time. The other stark reminder of what's changing here in Sonoma County is in 1997, 13% of the inmates in the Sonoma County Jail were gang affiliated. Today that's 30%. So in just that short time from 1997 to today, 10 years, it's grown from 13% to 30%. So a lot of our inmates in there are gang affiliated or have gang ties, and we have to deal with those in that way. Also, violent crime is increasing in most areas in Sonoma County, especially Santa Rosa and those areas, because of gang violence associated with those gangs. There are about 3,500 gang members in Sonoma County. You're currently mostly Norteños and Sureños, Hispanic, Latino population, but we still have white supremacists, the Hells Angels, Asian gangs, some Russian mafia, those people that we see on a regular basis in our jail, and we classify them as such and keep intelligence on all those people. So that's the other primary responsibility of jail. Again, it gives you a snapshot of what's going on here in Sonoma County. Right now, we're pretty much full in our jail. We can take about 1,400 inmates in our jail, but that 200, 1,200 on a busy weekend will go up to 1,300 or 1,400. And so right now we're in the planning process of adding on to the jail. The initial cost for adding on enough beds to put us in a good position for the next 20 years is $200 million. So we'll be asking probably taxpayers to help us foot that bill. So when you hear about it, that's what it's for. But we're also looking at doubling or maximizing our alternative programs. But there's not enough treatment beds out there. It's hard. Okay, yeah, we want these people in treatment. We already know that there's probably 100 of those inmates right now in our jail waiting for treatment. They've already been decided to go to treatment, but there's no treatment beds available to them. So it's tough to say we're going to have alternative programs when there's not enough treatment beds out there. So it's a mixed bag. And we're not getting much help from the state because of the budget situation, the budget crisis the state is in. So we're looking at trying to do more with less and taking on the responsibilities of the state. The state also, in their jail system, you're probably reading about, the governor is trying to send those people out of state to house them there, but the union has sued and stopped that, so we can't send them out of state. They're more than full. I was talking about we're almost maxed out, but that's actually real numbers. They maxed out years ago, and they're having people sleep in gym floors and everything else. So they're already over their population cap, and a federal judge has come in and said, if you don't do something immediately, we're going to stop allowing you to take inmates in. Well, if they stop allowing you to take inmates in, just like the state hospitals, where do they go? Well, they sit in the county jails until they can have a place to go in the state prison. So we've got to come up with a fix. We've been working with the governor's office. I belong to the California State Sheriff's Association, which is all the sheriffs in the state of California, trying to resolve this matter by working together with the state to come up with a solution. We're working on the details of that now. It's got to be a short-term fix, because even if we all decided there was another $1 billion out there to build a lot of new jails for us and the state, it would take 4 or 5 years to build those jails. So we need something to happen now between now and the 5 years that it would take to build those, even if we did have the money. The governor has set aside about $4 billion, I think it is, for funding for the state and local jails to try to come up with a solution to this. So we'll see how that goes, because that's what it's going to take to build enough cells. The last thing we want to do is have to release prisoners early, or people that shouldn't be released because of violent crimes, or people you wouldn't want back in the community that should be in jail for your protection also. So we're working on those alternatives, and hopefully it won't come to that. But it is complicated, and a thing that's been going on for years. The state has neglected building new cells for whatever reason, and now we're stuck with this dilemma that we're in. So we'll see how that plays out. As I mentioned before, one of the major challenges that we have facing us today is the budget. And even though the state's somewhat in bad shape, the county's in much better shape. Not great shape, but much better shape. We fight every year to keep up enough funding to keep the doors open in the county and the sheriff's office. And I fight every year for all the other competing interests to get that money. Mental health services, hospitals, other things that the county funds, mental health services, welfare fraud, all those things. And the services that we're providing, we're competing for them. As you know, a couple of years ago, at least it was in the Press Democrat, the county was threatening to take the helicopter away. And that's a great service to people who live out here. And we fought that vehemently about saying we've got to have that helicopter, not just for the coast, but specifically for the coast. And we were able to keep that funding going, because they're very expensive. But at the same time, we were able to show how many lives it saves, how many times they're used, and even if you save just 1 or 2 lives, that would be well worth it to be able to transfer to people. And since we are so spread so thinly out here, the helicopter, as I know, Rich would be in a lot worse shape if he didn't have the helicopter to rely on and bring him the services that he needs to help him. So that's something that we want to keep. We'll continue struggling with that. However, it is safe, at least for now. This budget year is no different than the other ones. We're still fighting for all the funding. We've been cut the last 3 or 4 years, so when we have an increase in crime and increased calls for service, we should be increasing our staff. But frankly, we've been cutting some of our staff because of the budget situation that we're in. And that's controlled by tax dollars that come here from Sonoma County, by property taxes, by sales taxes, but also by the state. The state can decide how much or how little we get. We have to wait to decide what they're going to do with their money and how much we're going to get as a portion of that to fund our programs. So it's a real mixed bag of trying to fund this from a whole different lot of sources and keep the level of services that we want to provide out there. So it's not as bad as some places, but still we struggle every year to maintain the services that we have. Eventually, as you know, the coast is, there's people moving out here. Calls for service aren't great. I have the statistics for Zone 1, which you're a part of. That's the whole Burnville River and coastal area. And it shows a reflection that's similar to previous years. But in the Sea Ranch area, I was looking at the calls for service, and it's pretty low. But at the same time, you look at the specific crimes that were committed out here, and most of them, as you know, for trespassing, people coming in on the private property and trespassing. And I think we do a pretty good job, Rich does a pretty good job of controlling that and working with your security to make sure that's under control. I was looking for any violent crime, any crime against persons, and frankly, there is none. I was looking down the list here. There was a couple of drunken publics, petty theft, a grand theft, a couple burglaries, drunken public, like I said. Very things that you would expect, but I mean, if you compare yourself to any other community, I do these all over the county. I get invited to do these community meetings all over. And I have to say, I've never seen such a low percentage of crime in any of those. I'm talking about even some of those Geyserville and stuff where you don't have a lot of crime either, but they have more than you have here by far. And so you live in a very safe area. One, it's just a safe area by its nature, somewhat isolated in those things. Two, by having the deputy sheriff live right here and having access to that and response the way we do in cooperation with CHP, and the fact that you only have your own security people. I think that the combination of all those things puts you in a very good position, not by the very virtue of the place you live, but by the services that you have available to you. I think it really dissuades people from thinking they can get away with anything by being vigilant, by working together. And the only thing I've ever heard is the good cooperation between everyone that works up here, because they have to, because everybody's short-handed. Nobody has enough people to do all they do. So us, CHP, your security, fire departments, state parks, county parks, all working together because they know that everyone relies on everybody else to do it. So cooperatively, I think everyone's doing actually a pretty good job of doing that. I was talking to Sheriff Allman about the situation, between us and Walla, and because most of you go there and do shopping, whatever, and come back here, that we have a great relationship with Mendocino County, where we don't hesitate to have our deputy Rich go up there and help them, and they don't hesitate to have their deputy come and help us, their deputies that are there. If they need us, we're there for them, and we'll send whatever we need, and them the same way, because they, again, rely on each other. We're talking about two counties here in a county line. And 50 years ago, that was somewhat unheard of. Now we say, we don't care, it doesn't matter. If somebody needs help, we're going to send it, and make sure that you're protected. We don't care about jurisdiction, we don't care about anything else. We'll figure that out later. But right now, let's get you those emergency services. And we feel really good about that relationship between the two counties as well as these other agencies. It makes for a really good situation where we can all rely on each other. And it sets a standard for your quality of life here at Sea Ranch. So, in other things that are facing us, and I talked a little bit about gangs. You really don't have gangs issues here, and Rich can talk about more about that, specifically about things. But for the most part, I was talking to Sergeant Anderson. We've kind of escaped that, at least from the gangs that are in Santa Rosa and the increasing gang violence. I mean, I'm sure you'll see some graffiti out here. We do know that gang members from the Santa Rosa area love to go out to the Bigot Dunes and those places and leave their graffiti and leave their marks on things. But we've been working with state parks and making sure we try to keep as much control of that as possible. In fact, we were talking about the fact that state parks was going to try to pass an ordinance that allowed them to take even further action at night and keep those people off the beaches and control that even more so. So we're still seeing how that's going to work out. But I know it is an issue, and I know that it has been a problem, but not up here, but down in some other areas of the coast. Because you'll see some evidence of some graffiti out in those areas. We want to try to stay on top of that, so that graffiti doesn't turn into other things, or they don't feel empowered to do even more so than that. So we want to make sure we keep on top of it, paint those things over, and keep a good handle on what's going on. Other crimes that are occurring and other situations, you've heard a little bit about terrorism and those things, and what's the United States doing, what's law enforcement doing. You live on the coast, and there was a terrorist attack where they come in from the coastal area and all that. I'm not really worried about that. I don't think Sonoma County's on anybody's list to come in and use terrorism against us or anything. But having said that, we feel pretty confident that we've done everything we can to be prepared in case that does happen. We've been working with the hospitals. We have a bioterrorism task force that we're part of. Our CSI unit works diligently to work with those people. Just the other day, we had a call from Geyserville Fire who had what they thought was anthrax in an envelope that was sent to the fire department. So they cleared out the fire department and called our people, and once we got there, our CSI unit along with County Fire was able to determine that it wasn't anthrax, it was just some powder in an envelope. But I remember a few years ago, it was actually before 9/11, where we had over 200 calls for possible anthrax in Sonoma County because we had those other ones back east, so everybody thought every powder that was in their envelope, or any white powder they saw was anthrax. So people were panicking and they would call us, and of those 200 calls for possible anthrax, not one was actually anthrax. But now we had just had a recent call about that. So it reminded me of what we went through before. We've had all our waterways looked at. We've done a threat assessment of Warm Springs Dam, of all our waterways, where we get all our water. Made sure that we had a specific plan to deal with those things. That's not a good target for terrorists because, at least in the main water source, of the amount of chemicals that are put into the water to kill things, they'd have to take truckloads and truckloads to be able to do anything to affect that waterway. And because of those chemicals and how fast it runs down the Russian River, it would be almost impossible to put anything lethal in there and have it last for any period of time. But we also had security measures. We upped those security measures. We looked at Warm Springs Dam. We looked at some structures throughout Sonoma County that could be a possible target for them. And we feel very confident that that Sonoma County is not likely to be a target. Two, if it is, that we're prepared to deal with it, even if it's bioterrorism, even if it's explosions. We have our own bomb unit. We work very closely with the FBI. We have our own intelligence unit that works with those people to keep up to date on all those things. And we just feel comfortable that we're prepared, although not likely that we'll have to deal with those issues. I talked a little bit about the crime trends, the gangs and those things. We're seeing a little bit of crime increase in Sonoma County in our areas. Santa Rosa's seeing a larger increase. Where we saw a 3 or 4% increase, Santa Rosa's seeing 18% increase over some crimes over previous years. So I don't know how many people go to Santa Rosa for shopping or whatever at some time, probably do. Their crime rate is increasing, but they're trying to do as good a job as they can. But those drive-by shootings are increasing. When I first moved here years ago, if we had a drive-by shooting, it was on the front page of the paper. People talked about it for forever because it was so unusual. Now, if you have a drive-by shooting, it's usually relegated back to the Empire News on the second or third page, just because they're becoming so commonplace. That's not a good thing. It's better if they did make the front page of the paper because it means it's not happening very much. But those are happening on a semi-regular basis. We're working with Santa Rosa and the other agencies to try to minimize the gang influence in Sonoma County, and so that it doesn't affect people's quality of life or it gets out of hand like it has in some places. We're still seeing a relatively low crime rate for our population. If you looked at us compared to Monterey County and Salinas, they've got 5 times the gang homicides that we do, yet the population is relatively pretty close to what we have here. So I think we're doing actually a pretty good job of intervention, enforcement, education, working with the schools, working with nonprofits to try to minimize those, to try to keep people out of gangs rather than those things. And not just gangs, but of youth violence that we're seeing starting to occur. And we're beginning more urban, so we're starting to see more urban crime. Elder abuse is on the rise. It's something that our investigations unit sees a lot more of, both financial, emotional, physical, all those things from an elder abuse standpoint. And then you have identity theft, which is becoming an increased crime, and we're seeing more of. Very hard to investigate, trying to find out where those people are from, because if they do some of these crimes over the internet, where are they from? Your victim could be here in Sonoma County, and your suspect could be in Germany. That's how hard it is to kind of keep track of these and investigate them. Having said that, it's the technology crime that we're we're keeping in touch with, trying to keep on top of. We have a lot of crime that is associated with embezzlement or business or computer related technology type crime. So our detectives are having to get better and better at those types of crimes too. We're having to send them to more and more schools to keep up with this type of crime. Our CSI unit is having to become more and more sophisticated in the latest crime trends. Crime fighting is like, I compare it to the health industry in some ways. Health industry is getting more and more expensive. One of the reasons is because it's getting better and better. And the things, the services that we all enjoy through health benefits, the new machines, the new specialties that keep us alive and keep us in good health are more and more expensive to have. Yet they're better and people are living longer because of that. Well, in the criminal justice system and crime, criminals are getting more sophisticated, crime is getting more sophisticated, the expectation is that we're getting better too. Well, along with that comes additional training, additional equipment. I walk into our CSI unit sometimes and I see all this equipment and how expensive it is to look at fine crime and be able to pick up evidence and do the things that they do. But it's very expensive to do that. So keeping up with that is expensive too. So if you want that quality law enforcement, you have to be willing to pay for it along with those other things. It's not like you used to do where the person would go to the call and say, okay, it must be your neighbor, I'll go talk to him and then we'll deal with it. So many times the courts rely or expect the type of evidence that you can collect with this very sophisticated equipment and the training that our people have. So we're able to do it. I think we're called a lot from other departments to assist them in their investigations because of the sophistication and the fact that we have those tools available to us. Deputy Zanino, even though he's out here by himself, he has access to all those things. We can have him, all those things that are stationed in Santa Rosa or the Burnville sub can be out here immediately or within a relatively short time frame for him to utilize anytime he needs them. All he has to do is ask, and if he needs that type of sophistication or help, those things will be sent out to help him in any way that he wants. So, I was going to, I don't know how much time we're supposed to, or I was supposed to let somebody else go. Rich, you want to say anything, or Matt?
I'll say a couple things. My name is Rich Swing, Assistant Sheriff for the Law Enforcement Division. And when I look at these stats, I was just up in Alexander Valley a week ago today, speaking in regards to their crime stats. And like the sheriff said, your stats are basically non-existent as far as crime goes. But in that line, I assume you have some good crime prevention efforts in this area, neighborhood watch. If you are doing those things, continue doing those things because those are very effective. We've got one deputy up here and with one set of eyes, but the more that you know your neighborhoods, the better off you are and the safer your community is. It's a proven fact statistically. So the more you get involved in your own safety, taking the measures and assisting your neighbors and businesses in the community, the safer you're going to be. So obviously you're doing some of that stuff, or you purely live in a great area and there's just a bunch of great people. So keep those efforts going.
Just to reiterate on that, you've got a great resident deputy, a substation, needs to work the area, but ultimately you're responsible for your own personal safety. It's no good if you allow somebody in your house that harms you or steals from you. We might show up and solve the crime and catch the person, but the damage has been done. So really take responsibility for your own personal safety as much as possible. Be leery of who you're allowing into your house, both realistically and figuratively. You know, we talk about identity theft and things on the computer and on the internet now. So really take personal responsibility for your safety. We're going to be there as much as we can, but again, a lot of times we're reactive, we're trying to solve the crime. Truly, as individuals and as a community, watching each other, you're the ones that are going to prevent crime from happening.
I was just looking at the number of arrests that occurred here last year, and of the 29 arrests, 24 were on-view arrests, which means Deputy Zanino actually saw them and took action, so he's out there doing a lot. And what the others have said, it really takes all of us to make the community as safe as possible. So calling, giving us the information, calling your security people, calling us, getting us out there. If you see anything suspicious or you need us to come out there, we're only as good as you are in letting us know what's going on. Does anybody, do you want to take a break? I know I should shout it.
You're done. Anyone else from law
We can
enforcement? Security want to speak? You can take a 10-minute break and come back when the big hand is on the 9. Does that work?
Okay, then we'll do questions after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Then we'll have a lot of questions. I have a lot myself.
During the break, I also asked Sheriff Allman from Mendocino County to speak to us a little bit about, compare and contrast Mendocino and Sonoma County law enforcement. And then after that, we will have some questions.
Good afternoon and thank you. I have a head cold. My wife and 2 teenage boys also have the head cold. It's gone around, so I'm not thinking clearly, and you normally sound like Kermit the Frog. Today's just a special occasion, I guess. As Sheriff Cogbill said, I think it sums it up that you're very lucky to live in this area and have the crime rate you have. But that's like driving 1,000,000 miles without having an accident, and having an accident 1,000,001 miles. You can't ever let your guard down. And you can't ever think that it's just a happy place and you're lucky to be here and nothing will happen, because that's when it'll happen. And you have to look out for your neighbors. And if you don't know who your neighbor is by the first name, then you need to make a pot of coffee and talk to your neighbor. And I don't want to sound like a father scolding you, but that's the truth. You have to know your neighborhood. Your neighbors have to know when you're gone. You have to know when your neighbors are gone. You have to work together. As the captain said, there's only one set of eyes down here, and I only have one set of eyes over in Walla. I have 3 deputies, but 1 on at a time. And I'm counting on those deputies to build a relationship with the community so the information can flow both ways. It doesn't do us any good to get all the information and not tell anybody, but on the other hand, it doesn't do you any good to have all the information and not tell our deputies. We'll work together, and we'll work with the Sea Ranch through the Walla Community Municipal Action Committee as much as possible, but we're all in this together. And with the all in this together, I want to talk about probably the number 1 point of my focus as sheriff, other than crime, and that's disaster preparedness. And I understand that Sea Ranch is very active in disaster preparedness, and the truth is, if we had that 7.8 in Northern California today, don't take this personal, but Sacramento probably doesn't know where Sea Ranch is, and they couldn't say Walla. They would say it with a G, the Gualala, okay? And I've learned it's Walla. So when the disaster hits, we have to plan together, really and truly. We have not just to put our supplies together and not have had coffee clashes and be warm and fuzzy, but we have to plan together and train together, because Walla and Sea Ranch will be working together. And the deputy sheriffs are going to take that great big pencil out of their trunk of their car and erase the county line of the bridge, because there won't be a county line when you need help. So I'm looking forward to working with your Sea Ranch disaster preparedness people. We're utilizing, the sheriff's office is utilizing a great deal of our drug asset seizure money towards disaster preparedness in our communities, working with the fire departments and working with the schools. And today's not the time, because really and truly, my brain's not in it today, and I couldn't sit down with your people today and figure out everything, exchange information, but I'm looking forward to a time where we can sit down and we can exchange information in a very open forum. And it wouldn't be a situation where we want to hide that information either. Everything we do needs to be on the internet, everything we do needs to be in the newsletters to say, if you want to join in with disaster preparedness, jump in and join the train. If not, the train's going to leave without you. And when that 7.8 hits, and you wonder what to do, but everybody else is taken care of, then it's like the old grasshopper in the winter preparing. And he thought he didn't have anything to worry about. So I don't want to sound like Chicken Little and say the sky is falling, but the chances of a natural disaster happening in every person in here's lifetime is very good. And San Francisco had 3 major earthquakes, 3 moderate earthquakes this week. And we're on the list, we just don't know what number we are. So with that, thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I'm looking forward to working with the Sea Ranch.
With that, I'd like to open it up to questions, and again, they could be on any topic. One of the ones during the break that I was asked about was the gender homicides, the 2 kids that were killed on the beach. And just want to let all of you know that that's very frustrating for us. It's an ongoing investigation. We've never stopped investigating that. What we did just recently was the original detective group that were working on that finished all their leads and did everything they could. And then we took it and made it a cold case and then gave it to brand new detectives. And they're taking it apart piece by piece and looking at it from a whole new perspective and investigating it all over again. So they've been out here, they've been talking to people, they've been retracing steps, trying to find out if we missed anything at all. So that's an ongoing, very active investigation. We're not going to give up on it, but it's very frustrating for us also. Another thing I was reminded about is last time I was here, I talked about hoping to get a boat for us to patrol the coast up and down. We did get that boat in cooperation with the Bodega Bay Marine Laboratory. They own half of it, we own half of it, and we've been using it as they get better and better to venture out into the ocean in this area up here. That's occurring more often. It's a pontoon boat. It's a 30 foot, 40. I forget. It's fairly large. And it's ocean going. The last boat we had out here for the coast in Bodega Bay, I asked the Coast Guard if this would be a good boat for us, and they said, if you continue to use that boat, we'll be rescuing you. They feel really good about this boat because it is one that the Coast Guard actually uses for their own operations. So it's very seaworthy, and we feel very comfortable about taking it anywhere we need to up and down the coast to help out. And that's another resource for us to have and have the ability to get out there and do that. So we're really happy about how that's worked out for us and given us that extra resource for the coast area. So with that, and I've asked Rich to come up here because frankly, if you ask a lot of questions about Sea Ranch, I hope he can answer them. No questions, we're doing such a great job.
I'd like to ask everyone to line up over there where Bill is standing and take your turn at the microphone. There are many of us here at Sea Ranch who don't hear well. So I know it's easy sometimes just to ask a question from your seat, but then nobody really knows what you're saying, or most people don't. So, have a ball.
Hi, I'm Bill McCarthy. I want to thank you all for being here today. I own property here at Sea Ranch, but I live in Walla. So, cross-county cooperation is a very important thing for me. I have a question for both Tom and Rich. It's fairly well known that in Mendocino County that, there's problems up, Point Arena in the north. Gangs, drugs and alcohol, spousal abuse and that kind of thing and so forth. What I'm wondering is how much of that actually transmits down into Walla and across the bridge into the Sea Ranch. How much of that is a problem for you further south?
In reference to the gang problem, we have a small area on the Sea Ranch that's we refer to as the Burbank housing. It's a low-income area that is on the Sea Ranch and it's on the north end. Periodically, we see graffiti in that area. We have in the past had some of the younger teenagers try to start gangs. In fact, it started at Horicon School and sort of gravitated down to the Burbank area. Sea Ranch Security, myself, started working with them in that particular area. We had a manager at the Burbank housing who was actually an ex-gang member who moved in there and worked with them also, and some of the community clubs worked with the kids also. Most of the graffiti is gone now. The families got involved. We took out a lot of brush out of the area so we could see the basketball courts and all, and eliminated a lot of the older kids that were hanging out there. Nowadays, about the only gangs, the gang personnel that we get in there are on weekends when relatives come to that particular area. We have a lot of people that are up from the Fresno, Modesto area, and here for a few days and then gone. We had the same thing up at the reservation at the Kashaya, which is just a few miles from here. And again, on weekends, you can go up there, you can see all red, and it's the people gravitating from the city that are up there visiting relatives, and then they're gone, and it's gone for the week. As far as the domestic violence, at one time, there was quite a bit of domestic violence here on the Sea Ranch, and again, it was in the Burbank housing area. Again, the community clubs got together. The women's groups in Gualala started working with Sonoma County. They combined together. We were able to talk to a lot of the people over here. I went into the community and basically told them, we're putting a stop to it. California passed some new laws that allowed us to get involved a little bit more. And I haven't had a domestic violence case in this area now for months.
Bill, I'm not going to change much from what Rich said. I'm going to go back to what we talked about before. Don't feel like we're secure and nothing's going to happen. If you see an XIV painted on a stop sign or on a building, it needs to be reported. It needs to be covered up within 24 hours. Otherwise, you're just advertising that the gang and their affiliates are welcome there, and it's not a welcome sign. It is to them, but it's not to us. To us, it's a warning sign. And we, as law enforcement, will report it to our Department of Transportation to have it taken care of as soon as possible, but you know what that definition means. It may not be taken care of for a month or so, because they're busy too. But as the community works together and as the community joins in with one another to learn what these signs are, if you see a bunch of Roman numerals coming up, I assure you the Romans aren't here. It's gangs that are coming here, and it's like a forest fire. And if you can extinguish it fast, Smokey's happy. And if you don't, it becomes a conflagration that law enforcement can't deal with. And fortunately, none of us up here work for the city of Santa Rosa. And I don't think the city of Santa Rosa would be here telling you they don't have a gang problem, because they do. But we don't want to become the city of Santa Rosa. And we have to work together. And my obligation to the community for Mendocino County is, if you can't get anybody else to cover up those signs, please give us a call. We'll have our juveniles on the juvenile hall on weekend trips to go paint it over and so forth. They're probably the ones who did it to start with, but or they know who did. But that's how we take care of it. There's not a magical answer. As far as domestic violence, I don't know. If it's not being reported to law enforcement, there's nothing we can do about it. And I would ask you to be aware of your surroundings. And if one of your neighbors is a victim of domestic violence, it doesn't say something, that you need to get involved, because law enforcement does not know about it. And it's going to be festering, and it's going to turn into a big sore. So if we can work together, that's the bottom line to both of those questions.
It's a new mic. Is it working? Yeah, I think so. Name's Mel Gerst. I live way up on the hillside, coming up for about 6 years. About 9 months ago, by this way, it's going to be a really trivial one. About 9 months ago, we noticed that the fishermen appeared to have started requiring new generation lights. The Sea Ranch, we're not permitted to have outside lights that shine out, they can only shine down. And that's to enjoy the environment. And if you look outside at the ocean, sometimes your eyes can't even adjust. It's really bright out there. What really brought it home was our dogs started barking one night. And I figured the boats were probably about a mile and a half out, and the shadows bouncing in the living room, in the bedroom, got them disturbed. So I'm just curious, did anyone else notice this? Have you gotten any reports? Brought to mind because you talked about you had your boat out there in the morning.
I don't think it's ours.
We get continuous phone calls during the fishing season about those particular boats. In fact, 9 times out of 10, we get calls about fires or somebody needs help out there, and we go out, and it's basically the fishing boats. They're pulling their lines, they're pulling their pots, and they're using the lights to light up the entire area. There's also boats, other boats in the area, so they have those bright lights so that when they're riding the waves, other boats will come up and see those lights and not interfere with them. And I know they're bright.
It looks like total overkill. I can't figure out why they're wasting all that wattage or reflecting it down or something.
I see them from my house also.
Okay, thanks.
I'm Sandra Bush, and My question is, CHP isn't here, and I think they were gonna be here. Do you know what our CHP coverage is on the coast now? Somehow I think it's changed, and can you speak to that?
It has changed, but Rich, as far as their coverage.
CHP has got down to the point now on the coast where they have one officer. And that's it, that's Officer Goldhammer. And he covers from the Mendocino County line down into Tomales. They do have a second officer that is living, I believe, in the Sebastopol area. And he is temporarily assigned to the area, but his area is exactly the same as Officer Goldhammer's. And then they try to fill in periodically with other officers.
They did add, in cooperation with us, they did add two CHP officers to the Guerneville substation. So they're actually, our Guerneville substation is not a CHP substation, but they've assigned 2 full-time CHP officers to the substation, and they would respond out here if necessary. But that might be your closest one, other than the one that actually lives.
Hi, I'm Julie Brown and I live in Walla, and I'm writing about this meeting for the Russian River Times. And my question is about disaster preparedness. Specifically, do you know at what stage the tsunami run-up maps for Sonoma and Mendocino County are now? Because the last time I asked, they either hadn't got them or they were still secret.
That's a good question, because I remember they had, what was it, a year ago, 2 years ago, we had that tsunami warning because of the earthquake out in the middle of the coast, and our deputies even got the call down in Bodega Bay to start evacuating places because the tsunami was supposed to be hitting the California coast and more specifically around here, and we learned a lot of things from that. Too bad it had to happen, and for us it was a false alarm because it never produced a tsunami here. But we realized how flawed our system was. The state system, more specifically, they're supposed to be involving us. They're supposed to be able to predict these things, get the warning, and then contact us. We realized how poorly that was working and how the warnings weren't working. We realized that the maps weren't done. I remember the Board of Supervisors and ourselves put a lot of pressure in our Emergency Operations Center on the state to say, come up with these things. I think there was a recent article in the Press Democrat about where were these things still, and we're still waiting for them. I don't believe they're still, I don't believe they're a secret, but we have a separate, the County of Sonoma has a separate Office of Emergency Services, even though, separate from the Sheriff's Office, even though we work with them on a regular basis. Sandy Cogbill is the one that's in charge of that, and she has been frustrated by trying to get this information. I don't know if it's the same in Mendocino County.
Well, I can tell you statewide, the Tsunami Training Day was set for Wednesday, March 28th of this month. However, at the state level, it fell apart. Mendocino County is still continuing on with that. We're going to have tsunami training on Wednesday, the 28th. Fort Bragg City is having tsunami training March 21st and 22nd with a tabletop drill. Julie, your questions are very specific, and I'm not going to answer them because I don't know. Other than to tell you that I would hope that information is going to be relayed to us on the 21st and 22nd of the training, and you know how to get in touch with me. And after that, if you do get in touch with me, I'll have that information.
Okay.
Let's hope the tsunami doesn't happen between now and then. Okay.
You mean about both Fort Bragg City and the one on the 21st and 22nd and the one on the 28th?
Well, the 28th is a training exercise that, like I said, it started at the state level. It was going to be an end-to-end user. It was going to start going across at the bottom of TVs, tsunami warning, and it was going to be the radio, and it was going to go all the way up to the governor. But the logistics didn't work. But what Mendocino County has turned it into is a training day for our ham radio operators to be able to talk to each other from every school. We have 68 schools in Mendocino County, and on the 28th we're going to do a roll call of those schools with ham radio operators to find out what our communication skills are in a real disaster.
Oh, that's really great. Okay, thank you.
And I would suggest this from Sonoma County, if you could call Sandy Cogbill at the Office of Emergency Services, she can answer specifically for Sonoma County all your questions.
Okay, thanks. I did ask her at a meeting about the Sonoma County hazard preparation, the hazard map, the hazard.
Right.
I've forgotten what it was called. It was a great big thick document when that was being reviewed, and she didn't
Rosemary Hawker. New technologies, and I'm wondering in general, are there new technologies that you're sharing with our local security people? And then I'm going to deal with a little old technology. A lot of us are now being able to carry cell phones. The only problem is that there are pockets here on the ranch and up and down the coast where we can't get any cell phone coverage. Is there anything that the Sheriff's Department can do to help us get the towers up, and is there support that you can offer to help us increase cell phone coverage up and down the coast so we can take care of ourselves better? I truly believe that an ounce of prevention is worth that pound of cure, and I do believe that we do have to take care of ourselves, but for some reasons. For many reasons, we can't. And are there things that you can do to help us prepare ourselves better?
We're as frustrated as you are because my cell phone doesn't work up here. And there are pockets, in fact, all along the coast. Most of Sonoma County now, there's some spots other than the coast, they have coverage, but that took a while. And there's still spotty areas. I can tell you even in Santa Rosa, I'll drive through some dead areas and where I don't have cell phone coverage for a very short period of time. It's really working with those private companies, but then they are frustrated because trying to get the permission to put a tower on somebody's land and go through all of the government regulations that you have to go to get permission, and not be, because a lot of landowners around there, property owners don't want it next to their property, so finding the right site and then putting the money in and having enough people that are there willing to pay for the coverage, to pay for their costs of putting in the infrastructure. I've talked to several cell phone companies and said, we're very frustrated. I remember Nextel and some other ones about increasing the coverage out on the coast because we don't get it, we don't have it for our deputies. AT&T, which seems to work a little bit better than most out here, as far as, maybe not in other places, but out here is better coverage. But as far as I'm concerned, well, you're shaking your heads no.
Verizon.
Oh, I've got Verizon and mine's not working, but
Sheriff, I have US Cellular and my phone hasn't stopped ringing since I've been up here.
Okay.
It works, I know that.
All right, so I guess it all depends on the area, but I'll do what I can. I have been doing what I can, but all those hurdles are part of it. But I remember when we wanted to enhance our tower up here for our own radio communication and computers and things like that. It was very lengthy and time consuming just to get that, and that's an emergency type situation. With the private companies, it's a little bit, they've got to see a profit. There's got to be enough people living there using those services for them to get it. So it's an uphill climb, but we'll continue to put pressure on it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is John Fox. I'm the community manager at the Sea Ranch. And I had three things that I wanted to mention. Thanks for coming today. The first is to let you know how very much we appreciate the work of Deputy Sheriff Zanino. He's a man of exquisite judgment. He's involved with us in solving our difficulties and issues. We know he's there. We know also that he has a very large area to cover, and we worry about that. We also worry about what might happen if he weren't here sometime in the future, through retirement or some other event like that. So we just want to let you know how very much we appreciate him and the work that he does here. He's a very, very special person. And thank you for your good judgment in bringing him here and keeping him here. I've been in places where there's been a turnover, and it doesn't work nearly as well because the community continuity is missing in those circumstances, and it's so very valuable to us here. Then I had two technical questions. One is more straightforward than the other, so I'll take that one first, and that is, with respect to the Sonoma County Emergency Services Department, we've kind of run up against a roadblock. There is a program which is sponsored by the state of California, but I think it's left up to the counties to determine whether or not, or how vigorously the counties individually will utilize the program, and it's called the State Disaster Services Worker Program. It was mentioned earlier that we have disaster operations effort here, and we do. And we have more than 100 community volunteers involved in this program. The program has a lot of energy and enthusiasm. One of the roadblocks we've run up against is that this state disaster services worker program, which provides a certain level of insurance to volunteer disaster workers, is not available in Sonoma County. And we can't figure that out, and we haven't been able to get anybody to tell us exactly why not. We've written to our representatives and had no response. So I just would like to alert you to the fact that that just doesn't seem right, it doesn't seem sensible that a state program of that kind, well conceived, which we know is available in other counties, would not be available in Sonoma County. So maybe you could look into that for us.
So what you're saying is that the workers' comp coverage is not available for those volunteers?
That's correct. They won't sign us up. They won't sign our volunteers up as disaster service workers, which is a registration process which is available in other counties that allows us to get that coverage.
I remember this issue coming up on a statewide issue, a legal issue, was whether these volunteers were covered or not. And the legal opinion was that they were, but you have to be registered.
You have to be registered, which means that Sonoma County has to organize the registration.
Okay, so that just, you want to know why that hasn't been done?
We'd like it to be done.
Okay. Okay, let me look into it. I
appreciate that. Then my third comment or question has to do with Sheriff's Department funding. As the manager here, I've done some research into the property tax funding which goes from the property owners here to Sonoma County, and the amounts of that funding which come back to the Sea Ranch in the form of services of one kind or another. And as you'd probably guess, the funding going to Sonoma County it's in the region of, it must be up around $10 million a year. About $1.7 million of that comes back in some kind of service, whether it's sewer, septic, coast life support, what have you, all of which is appreciated. In the review of county finances that we were able to do in collaboration with the county auditor's department, there is an item there which is referred to in very general terms as public safety. And there is a small amount of money allocated back to public safety. I think it's of the order of $150,000 a year. So I was thinking, well, maybe part of that goes to our Sheriff's Department, but that obviously is not a sufficient sum to cover the costs of running the Sheriff's Department, or at least our share of Sheriff's Department services. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about where the Sheriff's Department funding for Sonoma County derives from, because we obviously want to see that that's in good shape for the future.
Thanks. I do too. One of the Sheriff's Office gets its funding from the County of Sonoma through property taxes, sales taxes, revenues, fees. There's a dozen or more revenues that come in. They all go into the general fund or go out for specific programs. The Sheriff's Office specifically gets their money from the general fund. And that general fund funds those services most likely to be the most important ones. My budget for this year is $125 million. That's what it takes to run the sheriff's office for a year. Next year it'll be up about 3%, so it'll be 130 million or so. And that's just based on I'm not getting any new positions. That's just based on salary increases, health benefits, those type of things. So just keeping up with those things is a tremendous amount. I would like to see more of that general fund money going into the sheriff's office rather than some other services. But I also realized, I remember a couple of years ago, the county was hurting so bad that they were cutting services across the board, and they cut mental health services out across the county. They closed down the one in Guerneville and other places. Well, guess what I saw? Even though that wasn't coming from us, we saw more mental health patients. We had more calls for service. Our jail had more people in there. So when they cut other services, they affect us. So I don't want to argue too hardly, give me all the money and nobody else, because I know that will affect our bottom line. So I want to make sure that everybody's getting the money they need, but at the same time advocating for the sheriff's office. We're doing right now a specific strategic plan for the county of Sonoma, and that's been working with the Board of Supervisors, all the department heads, and the county administrator's office to come up with a formula to adequately allocate that money fairly and where it should go. Because right now, everybody gets a target amount that's equal to everybody else's department. Yet, isn't public safety the #1 priority of government? Shouldn't that be allocated more and given the first priority? That's my argument. And the board isn't disagreeing with that. So rather than doing things the way we used to, we're actually looking at a formula that would give the sheriff's office up front more money, a higher percentage of that money and for public safety than maybe the roads department or something like that. But remember, every time there's only a certain amount of money, and where that goes and where it gets divided, if it goes to us, somebody else doesn't get it. But again, I think public safety is the #1 function of government. So we are working on that plan, and hopefully that will result in more of those monies coming back to public safety and back to Sea Ranch or other specific areas.
My name is Kathy Gordon, and I had a question for Sheriff Ullman, but I think you can all answer it. I guess I'm hopelessly naive, but I didn't realize that Roman numeral signs spray painted on things was gang activity. And I'm asking, are there other things we should look for? I know I see practically every adolescent I see looks like a gang member now. But are there other signs that we should be looking for?
Well, as I said, I have 2 teenage boys, and for some reason they like to show off their underwear, and I can't figure out why. But I hope it's just a stage. I would encourage your forums here, which are incredibly impressive, and I'm very impressed with the fact that you have so many people turn out to want to hear us talk about law enforcement. Believe me, it doesn't happen everywhere else. But I think that you should have a gang expert come and spend an hour to tell you exactly that.
We're going to do that.
All right.
I just made an executive decision.
You know, this is still American, and we're free to do a lot of things. But when we see the kids that are all wearing red belts and red tennis shoelaces and red bandanas, it's a signal to law enforcement that there's a problem there. When on the other side of the street, everybody's doing the exact same thing in blue. And so whether it's colors or whether it's Roman numerals, whether it's flashing signs, all of these indicate that these people are part of a gang. Now there's gangs all across America. I'm a Rotarian, and I guess some people would say that Rotarians could be gangs, but the overall philosophy of Rotary doesn't have anything to do with hurting someone else or taking over turf. And that's what we're worried about. And that's we don't want innocent people killed. We don't want anybody killed. So if that's possible for you, kudos to you for asking the question. Thank you.
Captain Matt McCaffrey is in charge of patrol, which also has our gang unit. Matt used to be the sergeant in charge of our gang unit, the Magnet Multi-Agency Gang Enforcement Team. And I don't see why either Matt couldn't answer some questions or could arrange for somebody from Magnet to come to a future meeting of yours and talk about how to identify certain things. But we were driving up here earlier and saw a sign. I didn't know it was gang graffiti, and Matt said, "Oh no, that is," and he told me what it was. So we could actually help you identify those things. Matt, you want to
give you a 60-second primer? The sheriff kind of talked about it earlier. In Sonoma County, we have all types of gangs: Asian gangs, black gangs, white power gangs. but predominantly throughout California, same as Sonoma County, the majority of gangs are Hispanic gangs. If you look at the state of California, it's pretty much Northern California and Southern California as far as the Hispanic gangs are concerned. North being red, south being blue. Sureños or Southerners versus Norteños or Northerners. And if you went down to Southern California, it's kind of unusual. It's all Sureños. It's Sureños against Sureños, different sets of Sureños. You come up Northern California, it's Norteños versus Sureños. So those are primarily the two gangs you're going to see in Sonoma County, in California, especially Northern California. So when you talk about Roman numerals, the gangs associate themselves with two things, a color and a number. Norteños with the color red and the number 14. 14 being the 14th letter of the alphabet. Sureños associate themselves with the color blue and the number 13. 13 being MA, or M, being the 13th letter of the alphabet. MA is the prison gang that the Sureños derive from. So that's why the connection with the 13 and the blue. So that's it in a nutshell. We can talk about it for hours on end. But generally, if you're talking numbers, it's numbers somehow associating them with one of those general gangs. Blue, red, 13, 14. You get into more specific, what we call subsets of gangs, then it gets a little more difficult to identify. For instance, the graffiti we saw on the stop sign was LP. I believe it was LP. La Primera was a gang out of Sonoma County. So there's a lot of little separate subsets of all these different gangs that if you're not in tune to it, I've been out of gangs for 3 or 4 years now, and there's probably stuff I'd see that I have no idea what that means anymore. They're constantly evolving, changing, new gangs. So it's one of those things that, yeah, after a while, they all start to look like gang members to us because they, the way they dress, the way they look. That's like saying all graffiti looks like gang graffiti. Realistically, 85–90% graffiti out there is not gang graffiti. It's taggers. It's people that get a thrill out of throwing up their tag, their name, or just doing types of graffiti. So up here, probably realistically, the graffiti you're going to see a small part of it is gang. And knowing what gang it belongs to really is important as much as what the sheriff talked about. And that is picking up the phone, calling somebody and saying, hey, somebody's spray painted a fence out here. We need to get it covered up, or it's on a stop sign, it's a public thing. We need to get county roads on it or Caltrans. So I'd be glad to arrange to have somebody come up and talk about it in depth. But in general, it's one of those things that be aware of, just like we talked about before. If you're not sure, keep your eyes, your ears open, and keep yourself safe. But for the most part, it's not necessary to know the specifics, just to be aware of it and be safe.
I'm still embarrassed. I consider probably the biggest threat to my life or my well-being is not a fire, it's not the earthquake, it's Highway 1. And I realize you guys aren't the caretakers of Highway 1, but you're the ones that most frequent it, and you recognize the hazards. I recognize the hazards, a lot of us do. I know a lot of the hazards can appear overnight, but what gets to me is when that white line on the right-hand side disappears because the roadway's crumbled away, and I see it there, and it lasts a long time. The thing that's starting to bother me now is I let the slower car, I let the faster, I drive a nice speed, but I let them around me, and the official turnouts are quite a distance apart. And I would say my wild guess is now maybe a third of the unofficial turnouts my Honda wants to drag bottom when I cross over the ridge. So my question is, even though it's not your responsibility, and since CHP seems like it hardly ever has a look at the highway, do you guys have some sort of reporting mechanism to the state on the care of Highway 1 when these hazards pop up?
If you see something that's a hazard that is going to cause the road to fall out, and you want to call us, because it really is an emergency to get up some cones, or if it's just something that looks like it's going to happen, we would refer that to Caltrans. It's a state highway, they're responsible for it. County roads, I think, helps them sometimes, but it's mostly from the state. So we could pass that information along.
My question is, I've encountered this in my lifetime in different communities, like with the police department. When pointed out to a police officer, he says, oh, that's not my responsibility, that's some other department that takes care of that. And I'm just curious whether you guys really have a mechanism, if you observe something, do the sheriffs report things in on their own, without a request from us?
Let me talk about how Mendocino County uses that, or deals with that situation. I don't think it's anything unique. CHP is the dispatcher for Caltrans 24/7. Caltrans has their own dispatchers, but when there's a problem for law enforcement, we call CHP, we don't call Caltrans. And CHP being a state agency, they refer the information to Caltrans. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. There's no question that the group of people in this room have the power to change exactly what you're saying much faster than my phone call to CHP to say, will you fix a pothole on Highway 1?
And that's exactly on my agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim Jordan. One thing we haven't heard anything about today are drugs. We know that there certainly have been stories about meth labs and marijuana farms and the like in this region. And I'm just curious as to what your sense is of the trends in that kind of activity.
In Sonoma County, I used to work narcotics, so did Matt. At least from the lab standpoint, they're getting more sophisticated and smaller. And we used to find labs several a year in Sonoma County and dismantle them and arrest the people. Because they were not as sophisticated, they took more chemicals, you could smell it, you could see it, neighbors would complain about it. With the chemicals they're using today and the smaller labs that are coming in, you can do it in the trunk of a car. That's how small and sophisticated they are. However, we're also seeing less of those. Either we're not being able to detect those because they're smaller and less of them, or the Mexican nationals are coming up here and actually doing larger labs in more rural areas, more rural than Sonoma County is. So for a combination of different reasons, we're not seeing as many of those. We're still seeing a lot of meth. We're still seeing a lot of drug activity. Meth is the #1 drug of choice in Sonoma County, except for marijuana. Marijuana gardens, we're seeing more and more. We're seeing more plants. We had a rash of those back years ago, and now we're seeing more than we've seen in the past. Part of that has to do with supply and demand. The medical marijuana issue that's come up, and now you have medical marijuana dispensaries, and they have to get their marijuana from someplace. And so there's a huge profit for these people to come in and take the chances to grow these things. For one, the odds of them getting arrested is less unless it's a huge operation, because they're going to claim we're growing it for medical marijuana. And we've got a real difficult time trying to prosecute these. I stood up in front of the Board of Supervisors about a month ago and asked them not to okay medical marijuana dispensaries here in Sonoma County, because I knew that it was going to take organized crime to come in there and start supplying these, because they have to get it from someplace. And we know that a lot of organized crime is involved in huge marijuana grows, and they've been doing it on state property and private property. We've been finding large gardens out there. One of the things that we just did to help combat that is we added another 2 detectives to our unit for the meth problem and the marijuana problem. There's a CalMet state grant out there. We've got enough money from that grant to hire 2 new detectives to add to our detectives narcotics task force to deal with mostly methamphetamine, but also frees up some of our other people to deal with marijuana. But I have to say, it's been very frustrating for our marijuana. Every case that we've submitted to the district attorney's office for prosecution has been dismissed. It's political as well as practical. Trying to get a jury in Sonoma County to convict somebody for marijuana these days is almost impossible. But at the same time, you have to draw the line someplace, and we've been trying to put pressure on the DA's office to at least try some of these cases to send the message that if you're doing it criminally, and I don't care about the user that's got the amount of marijuana that's permitted in the law and they have a recommendation from a doctor. I'm talking about the big suppliers and the people that are selling it and using it illegally, we would need to put some hammer on this, because the schools are telling us that they're seeing a proliferation of marijuana, and it's easier and easier for kids to get the marijuana because there's a huge demand and supply out there. Everybody's growing their own because they can do it under the guise of legally. We've had cases where people come in and they're growing 100, 200 plants in their yard, and we go and take over action, and they come back later and say, no, I have a note from my doctor that I can use this and supply it to others, and other people, they're all patients. Yet we know that they're really selling it, making a profit from it. So it's been very frustrating for us.
On a separate issue, going back to methamphetamine, California used to be seen as a source country for methamphetamine, not a source state, but a source country. We produced so much methamphetamine that we were seen by other states as a source. Our methamphetamine was showing up all over the country and even outside the country. What the Mexican cartels have found, it's cheaper for them to manufacture it now in Mexico and transport it. Very, very similar model to what we saw with cocaine in Colombia. So the good news is we're seeing less and less of the hazardous chemicals that go along with the manufacturing part of it. The bad news is we're seeing a proliferation of it, much cheaper, much more of it coming across the border. So there's the trade-off there is less manufacturing going on in California than there ever has been. The trade-off is probably more methamphetamine coming across the border at a cheaper rate than it ever has been.
I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that many people in this room are grandparents. And if you don't think that methamphetamine is affecting your grandkids and they're not given peer pressure of it, then you're missing the boat. This has to be something you talk about you think about every day. And I don't want to, once again, to sound like Chicken Little. Methamphetamine, an ounce of methamphetamine would be $800. An ounce of gold would be $550. So what I just told you is methamphetamine is 1.5 times the price of gold, and people are putting it up their nose and they're peeing and pooping it out the next day. I'm not bragging about it, I've had over 500 people in the backseat of my car under the influence of meth. And I've told them what I just told you. And I've told them, if you can save that money, if you spend as much money as on meth as you would spend on gold, you could retire by the time you're 30. Without exception, they'll say the same 3 words time and time again. I don't care. How can you reason with that? How can you say, well, you should care? Do I get into the aspect of it creates gum disease and your teeth fall out? So you have all your teeth, they're just at home in the top dresser drawer? Do I talk about what it does to your families, your jobs, your life, your bodies? I don't know these men that well up here, but I'm going to tell you something that we all 4 have in common. We all 4 could make a list of old heroin users who are alive today. We all 4 could make a list of old marijuana users who are alive today. But none of us could list one name on our list of old methamphetamine users because they're dead. By the time they're 35, they're dead. And you as grandparents, you as community members, need to be aware that methamphetamine is the #1 crime problem that's going to affect our country. It's a one-time addiction, folks. You use it one time and you're addicted. How can we combat this? It was invented by Satan himself. The Nazi military invented methamphetamine to keep their bomber pilots awake. So, it traces its roots to Satan himself there. So, I'm sorry that we hadn't talked about drugs so far today, because it is affecting us. It affects everything we do. And I don't want you to go home and say, God, that Mendocino County Sheriff thinks the world's going to hell in a handbasket. But I'm telling you, we have to stay aware. I stay aware. I have a very selfish interest to stay aware. Like I said, I have 2 teenage sons. I finally found out something that my oldest son and I have in common. He hates math and I hate meth. So we've almost bridged a gap here. But we have to be aware. And when you see anything, that if you smell something that you don't know what it smells like, and I can't tell you what a meth lab smells like because we would all 4 list 20 things that meth smells like. But if you smell something chemically that you don't know what it is, notify your security people, notify your CDF firefighters that were here earlier. CAL FIRE, they're not CDF anymore, CAL FIRE. Notify them and say, I smell something strange. Because a meth lab, and I've seen it at Irish Beach, which is in Mendocino County is similar, not exactly like this. I've seen people come in, rent a house for 5 days, and absolutely ruin the house to make meth, where the drywall and curtains and and carpet have to be removed because of the toxicity. And it gets into the water system, and the water system, you know the carcinogens there. So please take it very seriously, and don't think because you live in a safe little place that it's not having an effect on you, because it does.
Can I ask a question from this side? What percent of DUIs are non-alcohol DUIs? Do you pick up a lot of people for having substances other than alcohol, driving and the like?
Yeah, I don't know what the percentage is, but I think a lot of our DUIs that we get, we stop, we turn them over to CHP, or if we do take them themselves, if we can, especially in the contract cities. But we're seeing a larger percentage of those combination alcohol and drugs, and that those drugs can be, whatever, marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine. That percentage is going up a combination of the two, but it's still primarily alcohol, unless anybody has any different information.
The sheriff's right. Most of them that they come across are alcohol, and then a test later will show that they're polydrug users, alcohol, methamphetamine, alcohol, marijuana. But usually it's the driving habits of somebody under the influence of alcohol that'll grab their attention. Somebody under the influence of marijuana may be similar, just not as noticeable. Methamphetamine, they're going to be driving a little more aggressively. Maybe saw on the paper today, gentleman that rear-ended somebody going about 65 miles an hour on 101 was arrested for driving under the influence of drugs. He was high on methamphetamine, but he was an extreme case. Somebody that probably been using it over a 24-hour period. So, whatever reason you want to say it, alcohol is a depressant. I think people have a little harder time driving under the influence of alcohol than they do some other drugs.
Are there any more questions?
No, I think I've scared him enough.
Well, actually, I have one. When during the break we were discussing a little more in detail about identity theft, and I know that's been a topic that's been of interest around here, and so I had asked the sheriff a little more, maybe go into a little more detail about how you can protect yourself.
And there's a lot of things to protect yourself, and there's a lot of things that you should watch out for, and sometimes, and to get more specifics, if you want one of our property crimes detectives to come up here and give us, just like you were thinking about the gangs, that would be a crime prevention unit to come up and give a whole hour on what you can do to prevent that. But usually it comes in the form of, and I know up here, a lot of identity theft happens from mail theft, but you have your own post office and you don't have them sitting out there. A lot of rural mailboxes is where people steal the mail from and then take the information off there and then steal your identity. But more than likely than not, it's also happens when you go to a restaurant and you leave your card there and you give them to the card, and then they take some worker there that's criminal also will take that information, swipe it twice, give it back to you, take that information, use it himself or sell it to somebody else that does that information. So that's a possibility. You got to be very aware of that. That's really hard to check because you don't see them when they go in the back and what they do with it. They're gone with their card for a while. When you go to a hotel, when you get that room key, and that room key, what they do is all your information's on there, your name, your credit card number and all that. You give it back to them and that information's still on there. If you have an employee, they can grab a bunch of those. If they're not swiped to the magnet yet, which a lot of them aren't until they use it again, that information can be stolen in your identity theft, and those things happen from there also. The other one, so you want to take those cards with you or throw them away yourself, or make sure that they erase them before you leave. The other one is on the internet. And just like I told you before, technology crime is a real headache for us, and trying to keep up with it is a real headache because the suspects could be in another country. Keeping track of who you're giving your information to. We all do it, at least now we're even doing it. I was always afraid to do that, is giving your credit card number on those sites and buying something over the internet. If you're dealing with a legitimate company, odds are that you're okay. But just be careful if you go on eBay or anything else, if you're who you're dealing with, those things. I mean, we've had a number of times where people come in and say, thought it was a legitimate site, I was doing it, and then next thing they find out their identity's been stolen. I don't think in this day and age you're going to be up absolutely 100% sure you're not going to have your identity theft unless you never buy anything with a credit card, unless you never go anywhere, unless you never do anything and sit in your house. You're probably pretty safe. But there's so many different ways to steal your information. In your bank, if you have an unscrupulous person working in your bank and they decide to go in there and tap into these resources, you think that's pretty safe, and then they can get the information. We've had cases like that before too. So be aware of who you're dealing business with. Make sure when you get your statements that you look and see where all your things are going. The credit card companies are getting much better at it. Now they'll call. I remember I was using my credit card more often than I usually did, and immediately they called and said, are you using it, and are you doing this? And we had that phone call, and I really appreciated that because it made me aware of it, that they were keeping track of this. So they're aware of it, they're getting better at it too. Don't leave information out that people could use against you. But again, there's a whole litany of things. We have brochures on this that can help you. We can have them sent out to you. We can have our property crimes detectives come out here and give you more information, specific information about how to avoid that.
Thank you. Oops, I think Bill might have another question.
Since we seem to be winding down, one final question. I just enjoy asking law enforcement people this. Out of all the cop shows on TV, what do you find the most realistic?
The TV show Cops.
I know the sheriff personally was a big Miami Vice fan. Actually, they've asked that question. It's been a while since I've heard this answer, but they took a poll of thousands of cops, and the uniform answer across the board was Adam 12. And that was, take the call, meet the person, meet the man, meet the woman, take the barking dog, the burglar report. I mean, truly, that's what we do for a living. Answer calls for service, meet people, deal with their problems. A lot of the other stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of sensationalism, a lot of things. I mean, you see the CSI unit, one of the most popular TV shows on television today. We have a CSI unit. They don't do what they do on that television show. In fact, it takes them a lot longer than an hour with commercials to solve crimes than it does those people. So I can tell you, but they like watching it because they like to pretend it's them and doing all this stuff. You ask them, and I watch CSI all the time. But I was in narcotics when Miami Vice was popular, and even though it was the phoniest show ever, I used to watch it because I was working narcotics undercover when Miami Vice was popular. Cops, from the perspective, they say, oh, these are real life cops who are out there doing things. First of all, they spend hours and hours and hours driving around with them before they get that one shot. And the other part is kind of boring, taking reports and doing little things. And they finally got a good shot to put on their show, so they drive around with them forever. And those cops are kind of posing for the cameras. They know they're on TV. They know they're doing stuff. And we actually use some of those cops episodes to show our people what not to do.
We have a college intern program where we have interns that want to come in and work different places in our department. Nobody was ever interested in working CSI until that show came out. Now, they get 40, 50, 60 people vying for a couple spots a semester. So it's interesting what we see on TV and what we think is real and not.
I'd just like to add back about a year or so ago, I did a 4-hour ride-along with the sergeant of the Mendocino Sheriff's Department. Found it very interesting. I did observe how boring the job is. Just a lot of riding around and looking for something, but just the conversations with them were very interesting. I think I learned a lot about it. And I would encourage anyone here, whoever has the opportunity to do that, assuming you offer that take advantage of it. It's very educational.
One more?
Not a question. It's actually just a tip, because you're talking about identity theft and buying stuff over the internet and technology tools. Most of the major banks now, you can on the internet get one-time use credit cards, and it's really easy to do. And then when you buy online, you use it once, and it doesn't work again. So if there is a problem, or if it's not Amazon, it's some little thing, you're not sure what the security, you can get that from your bank, and it's not a problem. So that's it.
Good tip, I didn't know.
Technology is a wonderful thing. We can all tell you, when we got in this job 20, 25, 30 years ago, our burglary or our theft detectives, property crime detectives, were chasing down stolen TVs and stolen VCRs. That was the meat of their work. Now they're chasing down $10,000, $20,000 ID thefts. So really, technology is a wonderful thing. You have to be very careful of it. Most ID thefts, their identities aren't being stolen. People are giving them away. They're getting an email from their bank asking them to update their account information. it's not their bank. You go onto a computer in a public place, check your email or something like that. If you don't know how to erase temporary internet files, don't go onto your email, because somebody's going to be right behind you, logging onto your account, checking your emails, and I guarantee you've got 5 or 6 emails sitting there that you don't delete that have personal information regarding accounts, passwords, and things like that. So be savvy. If you're going to go on the internet, there's plenty of sites out there about security and safety. Take 15 minutes some night and educate yourselves.
You can also buy gift Visa cards, which you can use just up to the minimum, and they work on most internet sites.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your inviting us here. Glad Tom could make it, and our staff. We do this at your request every once in a while. It's always great because I go through these county meetings all the time, and usually people have a lot more issues than you do, and it's always a pleasure to come up and meet a community as well run as yours, and appreciate the services that you get. And frankly, we don't have to make a lot of excuses for why we're not doing something about crime. So thank you for your invitation.
I'd like to thank Bush Fletcher for making all the comments and getting these people here today too. And we always like putting the chairs away.